Law and grace. Very big topic, and we have been in parts talking about it in the last few lessons, but for this week, the author kind of wants to approach it directly, and of course, in the context of the book of the Deuteronomy.
And it's interesting how the beginning of the lesson introduces the law as a reflection of our own nature as a creation. How can you have moral beings the way we are and not have a moral guidance for us to follow? Meaning that the law is simply a map. It's a guidance of how to be who we are, moral creatures. And diversion from this map, diversion from the law, transforms us into different beings. If morality is the conscious ability to understand and to make choices for what is right and wrong, then the law represents the moral guidance in our life. That's why in Ezekiel 28:15, it points out to one heavenly being with the name of Lucifer who diverted from the law, diverted from this guidance and map, and iniquity was found in him. And as a consequence, automatically, he did not belong anymore to the natural environment. He had to leave. He became a different being. He was led by a different power, not of love, nor of moral. So living and obeying the law for us means preserving our nature as we were created by God.
The key point that I take here is that God's law is not something transitionary or temporary just for certain conditions and time. It's embedded in us, and it will be embedded in us when sin is gonna be done with. As we separated from God, we interrupted an essential fundamental connection with the source of life and good, and we started a journey of misery. But there is hope because God didn't abandon us there.
And the book of Deuteronomy tells us the story of how God was leading his people to be his also representatives as moral beings or as law observants. At the beginning, did the Israelites understand the law? Did they have the power to obey the law? No, and no. They needed to learn this way of life, and God was kindly asking them to follow him and to trust him. The motivators that God chose to persuade his people was his love for them, his support for them, the good thoughts of deliverance that he had for them. If this did not motivate them to become moral beings, nothing else would have. So there should be only one response to God's love if we have realized what his love represents. And of course, if we appreciate it. If you love me, said Jesus, you will keep my commandments. Love and grace lead to the law obedience, nothing else, not the other way around.
Israel was a very good example for law and grace. They were slaves, and God saved them without them being able to do anything about it, but just to listen, to trust, to obey. Then they engaged in a journey of transformation from slaves to free people, reflecting the character of God. At least this was the goal. In the Ten Commandments, in God's law, there is also a provision to help us understand and to actually experience this concept and principle. And it's about the Sabbath. The Sabbath is a reminder of creation, how God created us, and of liberation, how he freed Israel from Egypt, and how he frees us from the bondage of sin. In the law, there is a big testimony about grace.
The Israelites were commissioned to spread the message of grace and God's law as rule of life. But in what way, though? Was it possible for them to enforce their good laws onto the nations around them just because the laws are right and because the laws are just? Not at all. Absolutely not. God's plan was, as we see in Deuteronomy, for them to demonstrate his grace first through the obedience of the Israelite nation. The same grace that was felt in their hearts when they were delivered from Egypt. And only after, when the nations see or experience this same grace, they would embrace the law. It will be willful and it will be by conscience, not by fear and not by force. God meant for his people to do the same thing as he did to them. So salvation is a gift by the grace of God only. That same grace leads us to the righteousness and to law obedience.
God promised to Israel to lead them, to give them success, to make them prosper, to make them overcome obstacles much bigger than them, to do things impossible to them, not because of their righteousness and merits, but because of God's promise and commitment. And this is grace. We are justified in front of God and in front of the universe, not because of our success in being good observers of the law, but because we accept and appreciate the sacrifice of Jesus. Then he transforms us and makes us capable to live according to his law. Join us again next week as we continue looking at themes from the book of Deuteronomy. The study is entitled Choose Life.